Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy to be back and talk about this topic today. For those of you that have been following this channel long enough, you've probably seen me in Istanbul before. So I'm back in Istanbul right now, which has become one of my favorite places. I was not expecting that when I first came here. And it's not so much for Turkey or for Istanbul in and of itself, although there are definitely things about Istanbul that I really love. Namely, it reminds me in some ways of New York City, but with more of a Mediterranean lounge lifestyle. So it's got the big city vibes and then all of the, hanging out and drinking tea with your friends for 5 hours a day. So I really, really love this. It's kind of the best of both worlds for me. I get a little bit of a break from the countryside when I come here. And it's certainly a different vibe from when I was in Saudi Arabia. So I am so happy to be back here, and I'm just really well connected. I have lots of friends here. I just, the vibes are great. So all that to say, I'm hoping to get back to making some content more regularly again. And this is a topic that I've wanted to do for some time. Now, I have talked about my experiences learning Spanish before, learning Italian, and now I've briefly mentioned in some other videos that I am learning Arabic, which it's been rough. That has been a rough experience. So today I'm going to talk about all of these different experiences learning these three languages, how they've been different, the different approaches that I've used to each language, and hopefully that will help you along with your own language journey if that's something that you're doing. I just think it'll be somewhat insightful. Maybe that's just me being biased about my own content, but all that said, let's get into the topic. So as I've mentioned before on this channel, I'm an English teacher and a language teacher. I'm someone that works primarily with adults, and most of my students are working professionals trying to learn English to sort of enhance their career or allow for other opportunities because of their language skills. So I think that that's important to understand because it's not necessarily easier to learn language as a child. It's just that we approach language differently when we're learning them as children as opposed to when we're learning them as adults. And I can attest to the fact, there's a little fly in here. I can attest to the fact that learning a language as an adult is totally possible, and you can learn one well. I don't think that you have to be restricted in learning as an adult. I just think that you have to kind of break up your mentality a little bit when you're learning a language as an adult. So all that to say, my experiences learning Spanish, Italian, and Arabic have been vastly different. So that's what I'm here to share today. I will link the videos that I've done in the past on this topic. I haven't touched this exact topic necessarily, but I have talked about my experience learning Spanish in more detail and my experience learning Italian in more detail, and I will link those in the description box to this video. So let's talk first about my experience learning Spanish. So basically, I grew up in Boise, Idaho. That's my hometown, and Boise has a sizable population of native Spanish speakers. So from a really young age, I was exposed to this language, and not in any really meaningful way. I wasn't learning the language, let's say, but I was just exposed to it through my friends, through classmates. I was constantly in environments where people were speaking Spanish. So just from a very young age, I had started to kind of pattern some things, okay? I wasn't able to speak anything until quite a bit later. I didn't actually start learning Spanish until I was about 15 years old and I entered high school. I started taking some Spanish courses at high school and really loved it, really enjoyed learning Spanish. And again, I had so much exposure. There were so many people to practice with and opportunities to use Spanish. So naturally, when you're learning a language and then you find yourself in situations where you can actually use the language that you're learning, it becomes more and more fun, right? Because you're like, okay, well, I'm starting to see progress here. I liked it so much, in fact, that when I went on to university, I continued studying the language, and that's where my skills got really, really deepened because I was taking quite advanced courses like Spanish literature, Latin American politics, business practices. I even took court interpretation and medical interpretation, which just really broadened my vocabulary. So all that to say, my Spanish language skills just got really, really good. I finished my entire undergrad in Spanish language, so that meant that I even wrote my thesis in Spanish. And by the time I graduated from university, my Spanish was quite good. I would say that It's not quite as good now just because I'm not using it in an academic setting in the same way that I was years ago. But I mean, I would say that of the 3 learned languages that I've learned, it's definitely my strongest still to this day. And for anyone that's interested in learning Spanish, I can just say honestly that of all the languages that I know, even English, and I say this as a native speaker, so of course there's a certain amount of privilege involved with that, but Spanish has opened so many doors for me, even in some cases more doors than any other language, including English. So if you're interested in learning Spanish, I highly recommend it. It's a great language. It's so useful, and Spanish is a great stepping stone to learning other Latin-based languages. Okay, now Italian was a completely different ballgame. So where I learned Spanish more in an academic setting, going to classes, studying it, reading the literature, drilling grammar, all of that sort of thing, my Italian skills came purely through exposure. And this really made the difference in the way that I learned the language. I was able to pick up Italian so fast. Now, part of the reason why is because I already spoke Spanish, which Spanish and Italian are so similar, both in terms of grammar and in terms of vocabulary. Just the sort of mentality involved with speaking these languages is really similar. So it was quite easy for me to learn Italian. The issue that I ran into in learning Italian was, again, I was living in Calabria, and in Calabria, a lot of people don't speak standard Italian. They speak regional dialects, right? So it's just interesting to sort of reflect back on the time when I was learning Italian, because I learned it like a child would, right? I was just sort of in a setting with lots of people all the time. I sort of got adopted into this Italian Calabrian family, and I worked with them on their farm. We had meals together. We spent lots and lots of time together. I almost sort of am part of their family still to this day. And that experience really forced me to learn Italian. It forced me to have to communicate because none of those people spoke English except for one of the sons of the family. He spoke English, but aside from him, I really had nobody else that I could lean on to help interpret or anything like that. So I was basically forced to learn Italian as fast as possible. And along the way, because of the exposure that I had, I also started to learn quite a bit of the Calabrian dialect. I know I've mentioned this many times, and, that's a whole different topic in and of itself. The difference, I would say, with this experience and what's so interesting about this particular experience learning Italian was I learned it in a way that a child would learn, right? I learned it in a way that native speakers would learn, just purely through sitting in an environment where they were speaking Italian and being forced to respond. And I've said this on my channel many times before. I think that we really underestimate the listening skills. And this theory sort of got developed when I was learning Italian, because I saw that just merely through exposure and listening to Italian all the time, I was able to pick up a ton of the language just through the context, observing people, and in some cases, I mean, I really couldn't participate in much of the conversation, right? That required me to just sit and listen and listen and listen, just like, again, a child would for the first couple years of their lives, right? This is a part of the process that I think we throw out a lot, and I'm going to drill this every time I talk about this topic, because I do think that this is an important thing that a lot of people, primarily adults that are learning languages, tend to throw out. So a question might be, if I learned Italian that way, then why haven't I been able to learn Calabrian in the same way and be able to speak it like I do Italian? And I have an answer for this. It's kind of a sad answer, actually. Speaking dialects is considered a bit low class. I don't feel that way. Of course, it's not my personal understanding or opinion of speaking dialects, but that's sort of the way that it's perceived, and even native speakers sort of feel that way. So it's not exactly encouraged, and although they find it humorous when I speak in Calabrese, they don't necessarily encourage it and try to continue speaking to me that way. The younger generation, at least. Some of the older folks, I mean, they don't really have a choice because they don't speak very good Italian. They just default to Calabrese in the first place. But all that to say, it has made learning it difficult because even if I try to actually speak the dialect, it's like people will laugh it off. They find it cute and kind of funny, but then that's as far as it goes, right? In addition to that, it's really difficult to find resources in the dialects. The dialect where I live most of the time, Vibonese, I don't know that there's actually any written content or any kind of resource. There's certainly no Google Translate. Maybe ChatGPT or some of these other AI sites might be able to help a little bit, but I mean, it's really, really difficult, and nobody is making Vibonese dialect learning content, right? These are languages that are primarily spoken. They're not even written. There are exceptions to this when we talk about other dialects throughout Italy. Napoletano, for example, they definitely have written content, and I think also some of the Sicilian dialects also have resources for learning them, but at least the dialect that I'm around primarily doesn't, and that makes things much more difficult. Now, learning Arabic has been a real trip because it's sort of stripped the veneer off of learning languages for me. It's really sort of changed the way that I approach learning language, the way that I encourage my students to learn language. So it has been a completely different experience from learning Spanish and Italian. I'll give you this short anecdote. So years ago, I had a student. He was Egyptian and was living in Germany. He was married to a Russian woman, and they had a daughter together. And he told me that his daughter at school was learning English, Russian, and German. And I asked him, "Oh, why is it that you're not teaching her Arabic?" And he said, "Life is too short to learn Arabic." Which I thought was so funny at the time. And this was before I actually started to learn Arabic. But now that I've started to learn Arabic, I kind of understand where he's coming from because it is so complex. First and foremost, something to understand about the Arabic language, if you don't already know, there is a standard what they call modern standard Arabic or Fusha that is sort of mostly used in media and publication and that sort of thing. The problem with modern standard Arabic is that essentially nobody in real life speaks it. So it's going to be really difficult for you to get around just speaking MSA. There are some debates about this, and a lot of people actually encourage you to learn MSA first and then start learning the dialects that are used in various regions in different countries. But that strategy really didn't work for me. I found that MSA was so far from the dialects, and it was just really difficult for me to actually understand anything. I felt like I couldn't even figure out what was going on around me. I mean, it just didn't make sense for me to approach it that way. So I had to start completely from zero when it came to Arabic. Everything in Arabic is so different. The alphabet is different. Pronunciation is different. I mean, even the way that they read and write is from right to left as opposed to left to right. And it's just a totally different grammatical structure, a totally different mentality that goes into speaking Arabic, I feel like. Also, in terms of vocabulary, it's incredibly dense. I mean, I believe that they have something like 12 million words. Now, I know that most people are not speaking using 12 million words. I know that. But it is something that's really important to understand because there are so many words for things that in English we might have like one or two. Maybe they have lots of different options, right? Or, I mean, that's not even to mention the regional and local dialects where, I mean, the variation in Arabic is incredible. It's, I would say, even more intense than what we see in Italy in terms of dialects. So from the very beginning, I learned the alphabet, and I learned how to write the alphabet, and I learned how to sort of start sounding out words with the alphabet, which is very complicated just because the writing system is so different from what we use in Latin-based languages, including English, which uses Latin letters. Their numbering system is different. I mean, even the concept of plurals, the way that they conceptualize plurals and apply them is so bizarre. It really takes a lot of practice. There's like a way to say one thing, a way to say two things, and then a way to say 3 to 10 things. And then anything after that goes back to using the singular form. It's very bizarre. It takes a lot of getting used to. And I'm not even close to being fully conversational. I can hold an extremely basic conversation. Let's say like, how old are you? What's your name? Where do you come from? What do you do for work? These kinds of questions I can manage. But the problem is that, again, I had to kind of approach this language through learning just a straight up dialect. I didn't even really go through learning the standard because I just found it too challenging to do that. It felt like I was learning two languages at once, which essentially you are, right? And within the linguistic world, there's a debate as to what even constitutes as a language versus a dialect, right? These are concepts that are still kind of up for debate. Now, the great thing about learning Arabic as opposed to learning Italian dialects is that there are so many great resources for learning the spoken Arabic dialects, okay? So that's something that's fantastic because that's not available in Italy, and something that would have made my journey learning Italian much, much, much easier. Essentially, learning Arabic feels like you've got a puzzle of a million pieces, and each day you're just getting maybe one or two pieces, right? And so my advice to anybody that's learning Arabic is to just stick with it. Start with the alphabet, I think is important because so many of the resources are written in the alphabet, and as long as you can read and write the alphabet and you can kind of sound words out, it's much easier to memorize vocabulary, and it's much easier to sort of piece together the grammar. But I would say if you really want to learn Arabic, at least from my experience, and again, I have a very elementary level of Arabic. I don't even think I've broken into A2 yet at this point. I would suggest just you have to be around the language a lot. You have to be exposing yourself to lots of different folks and speaking it, and of course venturing out, and don't be afraid to use the language as much as possible. That's what really holds a person back when they're learning a language, is just not using it, not engaging with the language. So this is the kind of situation where I think you have to have a ton of input, right? Learning vocabulary. Don't drill the grammar too much. The grammar is just so complicated. It'll just make your life a nightmare. But just as long as you're picking up the vocabulary and you're hearing it, you're listening to lots of different speakers, you're applying it in context, you're practicing with someone, I think that eventually you're going to figure it out. Also, get yourself a good teacher. And this applies to all languages. I would say, if you can and you can afford it, really get a good teacher. That's a great investment. And I have a wonderful teacher. She's so patient. God bless her. I really, really, really love her. And I think that, she's been so fundamental for me learning the kind of Arabic that I'm learning. I would not be able to learn Arabic if it hadn't been for her. So essentially anybody that speaks Arabic, they know the standard, and they learn it at school. But then they also speak regional or local dialects. And within each Arabic-speaking country, there are regional dialects within those dialects. So it gets really complicated. The kind of Arabic I'm learning is what we call Levantine Arabic, or Arabic that's spoken in the Levantine region. So that would be primarily Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. It is somewhat similar to the standard. I've been told that it's one of the closest to the standard, which is kind of nice, although I beg to differ. I mean, I really can't understand the standard very much when I hear it spoken, but all that to say, it's a lot different from like Algerian Arabic or Moroccan Arabic or even Gulf Arabic, Yemeni Arabic. It's all vastly different. The key, as I always say, is you just have to have a lot of exposure. I have a lot of Arabic speaking friends, so it's quite easy for me to get exposure. The problem is not all of my friends are from the same area. So although I am learning Levantine Arabic and most of my friends are Levantine Arabic speakers, it's still they're quite different. I mean, the dialects are quite different, the words that they use, expressions, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, even simple things like saying last time, right? Last time could be different from Syria to Palestine. So it just takes a lot of getting used to. And since so many of my friends are from different places, it makes patterning the language when I'm immersed in Arabic only speaking environments so much more difficult, right? Because at least when I was immersed in the situation in Italy and in Calabria specifically, it was all Calabrian speakers. So I was still patterning the same dialect. In this situation, although I'm surrounded by all Arabic speakers, it's so hard because they're speaking different and they understand each other, right? Because these are just variations of a similar dialect or language. But for me, it's kind of difficult to be able to distinguish a person that's speaking Lebanese Arabic or somebody that's speaking Syrian dialect. However, of all the languages that I'm learning, I will say that Arabic is so cool. It's the coolest one, in my opinion. Italian, on the other hand, I feel a deeper connection to just because of my own ancestral roots. But with Arabic, it's like, especially approaching it from a linguist perspective, it's just so different, so interesting. I find it a beautiful language when it's spoken and you're just kind of listening to someone flow in the language. It's like, it's so interesting. It's just, there are different sounds, different patterns, the cadence, all of that is really fascinating. And it makes sense, right? Because this is a language that's known for being used in poetry and different art forms. So, I mean, all that to say, if you really want to learn Arabic, go for it. I highly encourage it. Just be really patient in the process. All in all, my advice to anyone wanting to learn a language would be this. You have to get a base of vocabulary. You're not going to be able to do much if you don't have words to use, right? So no matter what the language is that you're learning, start with learning vocabulary and really emphasize that. Learn vocabulary in context as much as possible, because if you learn it in context, it tends to stick more as opposed to just memorizing a list of words or using flashcards. That can be useful. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm just saying it's much easier to turn vocabulary that you've learned into active vocabulary that you're using on a daily basis if you learn it in context. Obviously, if you're learning a language with a different writing system like Arabic, then you would need to go all the way back to the basics. I mean, I quite literally had to learn how to read again. So you would have to approach a language differently that way if you're learning like Korean or Chinese or something like the Russian, something that has a totally different alphabet. Once you get more and more words, you'll be able to piece together the sentence structure, and then that's where you can start refining the grammar. But I think a lot of people really focus on grammar because that's sort of the traditional way of learning languages. It's really going to hold you back, especially if you're learning a language that's so different from your own, and the language is so complex as opposed to your own language. It just doesn't make sense to approach it that way. So vocabulary. Once you get enough vocabulary that you can start actually using sentences and piece together a little bit more grammar, you can start refining that. And then before you know it, you'll be able to have simple conversations. And through that, you can continue to grow and you'll gain more confidence being in environments that are speaking only that language. And that's when you're going to start seeing a massive uptick in progress. I hope all of this information was helpful, and I just really enjoy sharing my language learning experience because I know so many people are really interested in this topic. So hopefully that was helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for liking, sharing, subscribing. All of that really helps the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye-bye.